Theo, how are you doing?
Hello, hello, Max. How are you? Welcome to the Late Elevenses Café.
Thank you for your invitation. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm glad you came.
Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something. So, lately I've been reading a lot of articles about global vaccine distribution, and a term that has been frequently used was global north, global south. I know that some countries, including Germany, my home country, has stopped calling certain countries developing countries or development nations because we felt like the term was inappropriate. Now I'm thinking, what do you think about this term global north, global south? Do you think that's inappropriate as well?
I think it's a term that simplifies the, geopolitical state of the world. I think that certainly there's a line that is drawn between the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. Just considering I know that you mentioned that it's maybe kind of changed the sense of how appropriate it is, but how developed countries are. If you think of the United States or Europe as being kind of bastions of this developed northern hemisphere, and then South America, Africa, and some parts of Asia as being the kind of underdeveloped, if you can use those terms, part of the world. Certainly, it paints a picture that isn't always accurate. And I understand why the sense is changing, because just being from Ecuador, you notice that there's certainly a noticeable difference between your country and countries in Africa and countries in certain parts of Asia. There's a difference.
I agree. It's not like I feel weird about people from the global south being like, well, Germany and France are the same, Germany and the US. It is simply not true. And I think you're totally right in saying that it just is a simplification of the whole world. But you already mentioned it and you kind of put it against each other. Underdeveloped nations, more developed nations. What I think is most interesting are the interactions between those two groups of nations. Because today we still talk about postcolonialism and neocolonialism. Do you still see some effects of those or of the past colonialism in your home country, in Ecuador?
I think it's an incredible question to ask because it is just so prominent. I mean, certainly, as you say, it's such a historic marker for the Latin America and for South America. Colonialism, I think it is part of people's identities from the population, the demographic. There's so many people who are, quote unquote, criollas, which is the term we say for people who are historically mixed between European, Caucasian, and indigenous from people from South America originally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just from our personal identity going into our relationship with the rest of the world. I mean, you notice people speak about a debt of gold, even in the 21st century. I mean, this is people who are requesting that Europe pay a sum of money to replenish what they stole, in their opinion, stole from South America during the colonial era.
Wow, I have never heard about that, and I think that is outrageous. No, really. Just to give you kind of the perspective that I'm looking at this, Germany, for example, has paid a ton of reparations to the Jewish people after World War II. Understandably, of course. We did them harm, and we had to pay for it. At the same time, Germany refuses to pay reparations to other nations. Some tribe in southern Africa, Harari. No, we call them Hereros. I don't know the translation though. But I think it kind of shows a pattern of so-called modern nations who don't want to pay reparations to former colonies. And I don't even know about the demands that you make, and I think that's even worse.
I mean, it's a debate. It's a debate, right? Who is, what is justified? Are reparations justified at this point? I mean, people will tell you that, the wealth, the development that was given to South America is unparalleled. And there's all these different questions on both sides. And I think it is just very interesting to see what each kind of asks for. But certainly, even in that same vein, I think a memory, a even trauma of colonialism still exists in South America to the degree where certainly, and again, is it so unjustified? That's a question for each. But even talking about the 20th century, right, when you have the United States that has a certain presence in South America, people really do consider them, and a lot of people's politicians currently consider them to be very much kind of this in the same vein as a colonialist trying to put in their hands into property there. But that's interesting what you're saying about Germany, just how they what groups they decide to, who they recognize as meriting reparations.
You mentioned the US is seen as kind of a colonial power in Ecuador, here sometimes in the whole of South America. In what way does the US exercise colonial or colonialism-like power?
I think it's certainly something that's a memory of the Cold War. During the Cold War, as you know very well, the United States had a very particular way of going about putting its influence into South America. I mean, there was many times where it just simply was supporting economically groups that were more capitalist and there to be able to bring down the more communist or socialist governments. They felt that a lot of people in South America felt that was a very unjust way of putting in their powers, and their influence was a little bit too aggressive. But at the same time, what's interesting is that we have a very notable president of Ecuador who would refer to the United States as the empire. That's how he would mention them in his, yeah, he would say, oh, the empire, this and that. That's the term that he would use. He was the same person who would very much sell a lot of things and be able to have a very strong partnership that to me almost sounds to be as influential as having inviting so much influence from China as they were trying to say that they wanted to refuse from the United States. So I mean, it's all a game of interests, of power. I think there's still certainly a memory there coming from the Western world, and that's why maybe it could be that politicians are more open to accepting help from China or investment from China, and not so much from the United States.
But I'm more solution oriented, and I'm asking myself now, so what can we do? What can, especially the global north, with all of its resources, with its money, what can we do to revert the effects of colonialism? Is it paying reparations? Is it giving back old artifacts like we are currently asked for or asked to do from many African tribes? What is the solution to kind of solve the problem of poverty, solve the problem of underdevelopment?
Mm-hmm. And whose responsibility is it after all? I mean,
true.
Those types of questions too. Max, I hear that maybe I've received my phone call telling me that I now have to return home. Thank you so much for joining me for this wonderful conversation. And you've asked many interesting questions who I think must need some answering.
It was great to learn about this. Thank you. See you next time.
Bye. Sure. Take care. Bye, buddy.